Shana Tova, friends, once again. You know, no one could have possibly anticipated the uncertain and tumultuous path that we have navigated this year. We always aim to begin the new year on a note of gratitude for life, for health, for the many blessings that we enjoy at this season. Fortunately, we've found so many wonderful hidden blessings in this most difficult of years. Family dinners, cooking and baking, evenings home to connect with our spouses. Instead of commutes to and from the office, we've had time with our kids and time for exercise. We've learned that we can live well with less. In the initial weeks of the pandemic, as spring began to bloom, I recall seeing the most unbelievable sights. Parents taking walks with their children. Kids playing with their siblings in the backyard. It was as if the Messianic era had arrived right here in Connecticut. And wedding couples who were crestfallen that they could not have the grand celebration that they had envisioned instead put their assets into buying a home. They created an appropriately distanced backyard wedding ceremony and began the next stage of their life with beauty and joy. One congregant said to me, "We had just become empty nesters, but all of a sudden we had our daughters with us. They were around the dinner table with us every single night. And we would talk about our day. We would watch shows together. It was magical." I can only imagine how sweet and fulfilling that must have been. Yes, in the midst of the very full lives we lead, the pandemic has forced us to slow down. And our distancing from others has created space to breathe, to notice, to appreciate. These are blessings in and of themselves. It has also created space for an historic movement for racial justice in our nation. I'll address that more specifically on Yom Kippur. So we arrive at this Rosh Hashanah acutely aware that we are living through a significant shared experience, although our individual stories have surely differed. Most significantly, death has touched so many. Some in our community lost cherished spouses. Some lost parents or grandparents who were expected to live several more years. We've lost John Lewis and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Most heartbreaking of all, we couldn't visit our loved ones in their time of need in the hospital as they lay sick. We couldn't hold their hands. We couldn't have a proper funeral and shiva. We couldn't hug those who would normally come to share comfort with us. And even in those households that have not been touched by death, it's been hard. Parents have struggled to balance their kids' online education with the demands of their own work. Grandparents have been unable to hold their grandchildren's hands. Some professionals have been laid off. Some have seen their income drastically reduced. And many worry daily about the future of their business. Students have lost graduations and prom, and college as we have come to know it. We've all lost long-anticipated celebrations, simchas, holidays, time with friends. Now, at this point, you may be saying, "But Rabbi, there are so many other people out there who have it worse. I should be grateful." And that's often true, especially in our community. I know that our privilege has insulated some of us from the harshest economic impact of the pandemic. And acknowledging that we are fortunate is both a healthy perspective and a dose of humble gratitude. Rabbis have the privilege of being with people through times of suffering. Death and illness, of course, but also the less visible struggles. The anguish a parent feels when a child is going through adversity, the pain and loneliness of marital discord, the disappointment of a career sidetracked. And along the way, I've learned something. I've learned that it doesn't help to minimize our own suffering. It may be true that other people have it worse, but our own struggle is no less valid and no less true. So let's make no mistake. This period has been extraordinarily difficult for all of us. We are feeling unmoored. We've experienced pain and loss, dislocation and loneliness, anguish and anxiety and fear. All of these on a daily basis for almost 6 months. And we have no idea when this will end. So it does us no good to push away the pain. On this Rosh Hashanah, let's dwell for a little while in the pain and loss and, yes, the suffering of this year. Now, I want to make a distinction between evil and misfortune. Evil is caused by human beings. The Holocaust, 9/11, anti-Semitism, racism. These are all a result of human decisions, humans following their Yetzer Hara, the inclination within each of us that has the potential to lead us astray. In contrast, misfortune has no direct or immediate human cause. Cancer, a hurricane, the forest fires out west, a pandemic. These events are beyond even our significant human capacities. Human beings have every right to wonder why suffering exists. It's natural to wonder why God would do this to us. Not surprisingly, each religious tradition has its own explanation for suffering. Christians believe that humanity was perfect right up until the moment that Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit of the tree. That's when suffering entered the world. And each successive generation, they believe, inherits Adam and Eve's original sin. Human beings therefore start their lives at a deficit, stained by that original sin. And the only way out of suffering, they believe, is through the love and forgiveness of Jesus. Buddhists believe that pain is inevitable. It's caused by selfishness, greed, and desire. But if one can somehow free oneself from these, then one can theoretically overcome suffering. Now, friends, here's the important point for this morning. While other religions aim to escape suffering, we Jews know that is simply not possible. History has shown us, and our own personal experience has proven, that suffering is unavoidable. We know we can't escape it. So the question I pose on this Rosh Hashanah is not, can we discern divine purpose in human suffering, but rather, can we discern human purpose in human suffering? In other words, can we learn from this? Fortunately, we have an entire Jewish literature of suffering and survival. It's born of experience, and it's strengthened through generations. So I want to share 3 stories with you, with the hope that they lend new meaning and depth and purpose to the trials of our own day. A congregant recently called this the year of Job, and how insightful he was. You see, Job was a man who had everything: tremendous wealth, a large family, perfect health, and one by one, each of these was taken away from him. As Job sat suffering in pain, his friends came to try to console him. They each say something along these lines: "Job, my friend, tragedies like this don't just happen randomly. You must have done something to warrant this. Or maybe your children or your ancestors sinned, and you weren't aware of it. But trust us, God is surely just and fair." Of course, as you might imagine, these friends are completely unhelpful to Job. We know, as Job did, that we don't bring suffering upon ourselves through sin. We know we did nothing to deserve all of this. And despite his pain and suffering, Job refuses to curse God. He offers simply a statement we now use at burials: God gives and God takes away. Blessed be the name of God. And guess what? Everything Job once had is restored. His family, his flocks and herds, his home, his health. The congregant who offered this comparison said, like Job, I hope in the end we all wind up in just as good shape as we were before. Indeed. We can learn from Job's constancy, his refusal to turn bitter. This is a victory in and of itself. But for us, will it be enough if everything just goes back to the way it was before? Early in the pandemic, Israeli singer Hanan Ben-Ari wrote a song entitled Gaguim, Longings. Cantor created a beautiful English version for last night's service. It's about how our world of power and glory was suddenly toppled. And he concludes the song, and I wonder if it's possible that the morning after it leaves, we won't ever be the same again. Yes, the pandemic has invited us to reconsider the patterns that shaped our lives. Rabbi Shalom Lipsker said, "You've got to spend some time with yourself now and figure it out. What's your value in this world? Are you making a difference? Are you only here to take from the universe what it has to offer? Or are you also here to make this a better place, a holier, happier, more constructive place?" Friends, if we do this right, the pandemic will enable us to make changes we know we should have made long ago. Surely some will commute less. Some who have been unsatisfied in their chosen field will take this opportunity to change their career. Some will trade income for happiness or fleeting time with children and spouses. Some will consume less. We will all treat our planet more gently, I hope. When our children and our grandchildren ask us about this time, as I hope they will we say, "We got through it"? Or will we tell them, "It was a pivotal turning point in my life. It was the start of a new stage for me. Everything after was different"? From Job, we learn that our suffering will have had purpose only if we promise never to be the same again. The second story I'll share on this morning begins with the narrative of Abraham and Isaac, which we read this morning. It begins, God tested Abraham. Our sages comment on this verse with the following lesson. A potter makes clay vessels, and he tests each one by wrapping it with a stick to make sure that it won't break. If he notices a crack or a defect in the vessel, he won't bother testing it, as he knows it will surely shatter. But the well-formed vessels he always tests with that stick, ensuring that they are strong enough to be put to good use. Similarly, God puts only the righteous to the test. A member of this congregation told me recently about a difficult time in his life. It was the middle of the early 90s recession. I was going through a terrible divorce. And my father, mother, and grandmother all died within just a couple of months. I wondered, how can I possibly make it through this? Friends, so many of us have asked ourselves the same question at some point along our own journey. Yes, like a potter, God tests God's creations. God gives us what we can handle, knowing that each test makes us just a bit stronger. Here, the human purpose in suffering is to learn how strong we really are and to gather additional strength for the path ahead. More than ever, we have no idea what lies ahead for us in this new year. Our liturgy speaks of birth and death, how many will pass on and how many shall come to be. It speaks of natural disaster, who shall perish by fire and who by water. It speaks of our home life, who shall be tranquil and who shall be troubled. Perhaps it even speaks of a pivotal election, who shall be humbled and who exalted. With an uncertain future ahead, I pray that at the very least each of us finds strength in the trials we've faced and resilience against loneliness. And now, the final story. 2,500 years ago, our beloved capital, Jerusalem, was brutally conquered by the Babylonians. Its homes were pillaged, its citizens exiled, and its temple demolished. The prophet Jeremiah sat on a nearby hilltop, watching the destruction and writing verses of poetry. Yael Ziegler describes his verses as an attempt to grapple with catastrophe. We call those verses today the Book of Lamentations, or Eicha in Hebrew. And it begins with words appropriate for our time too. How lonely sits the city that was once full of people. From there, Lamentations becomes a timeless meditation on faith in human resilience and the ability to survive in a broken world. A friend pointed out that part of what it means to be Jewish is that we carry around the suffering of prior generations. Our great-grandparents who escaped Europe, our grandparents' struggles on the Lower East Side or in Brooklyn, and sometimes that can feel like a burden. At other times, though, perhaps it can be a source of strength. Like Jeremiah, Viktor Frankel saw profound purpose in human suffering. He survived a number of Nazi camps, including Auschwitz. And he wrote, we are ready and willing to shoulder any suffering as soon and as long as we can see meaning in it. Suffering presents us with a challenge to find goals and purpose that make even the worst situation worth living through. Surely, friends, we are fortunate, each of us, to have deep reservoirs of purpose and so many worthy goals, professional passions, commitments to those we love, the improvement of our community. All of these make life not only worthwhile, but ultimately fulfilling and sweet. A generation after the destruction of Jerusalem, the prophet Zechariah called us Jews Asirei Tikva, prisoners of hope. Never has that compliment been more true. We cannot escape suffering because it's inevitable, but we carry with us the gift of hope. Rabbi Jason Rubenstein reflected on this year, writing, God promised us so much: a world governed by justice, a world where parents will not fear for their children's welfare, a world of peace. And instead, we find ourselves in a world of violence and oppression and fear. And this world outside these windows wears away at our capacity for hope, jading us to the possibility of redemption, making our most fervently held dreams seem childish. But somehow, we Jews have held out hope. It is not so much improving the world that Judaism aims at, but at resisting the corrosion of our capacity to dream. Turn our losses into dancing, says the psalm. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. We are suffering and we are weary, but we are resilient and we are unwilling to give up. We dream of a future redemption. Even now, today, we remain Asirei Tikva, prisoners of hope. This is our tradition's gift to us. And maybe it's our gift to the world, too. Friends, we love to use the words L'Shana Tova, to wish one another a good year to come. But what if? What if we had the chance to apply those words, Shana Tova, to last year? Even with all of its difficulty, even with all its tumultuousness, I want to suggest that we still have that opportunity to make last year a good year. Life is not about what happens to us, but rather it's about how we react to the events we encounter. The virus happened to all of us. The losses we suffered are ours individually and communally. But there is still time to make last year a good year by finding purpose in human suffering. There's still time to make last year not just a difficult year, but a good year, and God willing, this new year too. So friends, may we never be the same again. May we gather strength for the path ahead. May we nurture resilience to thrive in this very broken world. May those who sow in tears reap in joy. And may we always remain, proudly, prisoners of hope. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so.